After losing everything, a widowed mother and her children found refuge in an unimaginable place, the hollow interior of a giant abandoned statue. But what seemed to be merely a desperate shelter held a secret that would change their lives forever. The air inside the colossal structure was dense, heavy with the scent of ancient dust and cold metal. There was no light, only a faint, muted glow that filtered through distant cracks and openings, painting ghostly shadows on the inner walls. Ilara squeezed the hands of her children, Liam and Maya, feeling the tremor in their small fingers. A wind moaned through the statue's apertures, a constant lament that made Maya's, the youngest, heart pound against her ribs. "It's enormous, Mama," Liam whispered, his voice echoing and getting lost in the vastness. His eyes scanned the space, trying to make sense of the darkness that stretched above and around them. It was like being inside a hollow mountain, but a mountain sculpted by giant hands. "Yes, my love," Ilara replied, her voice trying to convey a calm she didn't feel. "But it's a shelter. It's safe." She didn't know if it was safe. It was just a place where the rain wouldn't reach them and the night's chill wouldn't be so biting. The first step was to find a corner. Ilara guided them across the uneven surface, their shoes crunching over debris and what looked like fragments of rusted metal. Each step produced an echo that multiplied, transforming the sound of their breaths into an orchestra of whispers. Finally, she found an alcove at the base of one of the curved walls, a slightly more sheltered spot where the dust seemed a little less thick. "Here," she said, releasing the children's hands, "let's clear this spot." With a piece of cloth she'd kept, Ilara began to sweep the floor, raising clouds of dust that made Liam cough. Maya, startled, clung to her mother's leg. This place didn't feel like a home. There was no warmth, no smell of food, just the oppressive cold and the melancholic sound of the wind. "Don't worry, my love," Ilara murmured, hugging her daughter. "We'll make it our home, I promise." The promise sounded hollow even to her own ears, but she had to try, she had to believe. The memory of her husband, of his gentle smile and his quiet strength, was an anchor amidst the whirlwind of despair. He would have found a way, and she would too, for her children. The days that followed were a daily battle against the hostile environment. Ilara went out to search for food and supplies, leaving Liam in charge of looking after Maya. The long hours alone outside were filled with suffocating anxiety. Every rustle, every noise in the nearby forest, every cast shadow made her fear the worst. But she always returned, carrying dry branches for a rudimentary fire, pieces of torn canvas to create a makeshift shelter inside the statue, and sometimes a handful of wild berries or a piece of stale bread found in distant villages. The campfire, a small trembling flame in the midst of the darkness, was their only source of warmth and comfort. Its smoke rose and was lost in the vastness above the statue, finding no ceiling. The scent of burning wood, mixed with mold and metal, began to become the perfume of their new home. Liam, initially skeptical and fearful, began to help his mother. He stacked branches, helped spread the canvas, and even tried to tell stories to Maya, whose eyes still carried a latent fear. The statue, despite its imposing presence, began to yield to human persistence. A small area was marked out with stones, a makeshift room with the canvases and blankets Ilara had found. The children's voices, once muffled by fear, began to echo more frequently, though still in low tones. Nights were the hardest part. The wind outside howled, and inside the statue sounds were amplified and distorted. Metallic creaks seemed like groans of invisible creatures. The cold seeped into their bones. Ilara lay between her children, hugging them tightly, listening to their breaths and praying for dawn to come soon. One morning, while searching for more dry branches on the uneven ground, her fingers brushed against something unusual. It wasn't rusted metal or stone, but a smooth, cold, almost polished surface that seemed to be beneath the layer of debris. A spark of curiosity, a flicker of interest ignited within her. The statue wasn't just a shelter. It held something more. That thought, for a brief moment, diverted her mind from hunger and cold and filled her with a different kind of tension. That smooth, cold surface beneath her fingers was no mistake. Ilara knelt in the dust, her eyes fixed on the spot where her fingers had brushed. It was as if the statue's floor, which until then had seemed a chaotic mix of debris and packed earth, concealed a different skin. A spark of hope, a strange and almost dangerous sensation ignited within her. The statue wasn't just a shelter, perhaps it was something more. With her hands, she began to clear away the fragments of rusted metal, loose stones, and compacted dust. The work was slow and exhausting. With each movement, clouds of dust rose, making her cough and her eyes water. The scent of metal and mold intensified, mixing with the sweat on her skin. There were no tools, only her aching fingers and a mother's stubborn persistence. Liam, seeing her absorbed, approached cautiously. "What are you doing, Mama?" His voice echoed, a small sound in the vastness. "I think I've found something, my love," Ilara replied, without taking her eyes off the ground. Her muscles burned, but an invisible force propelled her. She felt she was on the verge of a discovery, and that feeling was a balm to her wounded soul. Maya, who was playing near the campfire with a stick, looked at her mother and brother, her eyes curious. The trembling glow of the flames cast dancing shadows on the statue's curved walls, transforming them into grotesque shapes that sometimes still frightened her. Ilara continued, using a twisted piece of metal she'd found to scrape away the most stubborn dirt. Slowly, the smooth surface began to reveal itself over a larger area. It wasn't stone nor rusted metal. It appeared to be some kind of polished stone, a dark grey, almost black, with subtle veins that shimmered in the faint light filtering from above. It was cold to the touch, but not the biting cold of metal. The wind outside seemed to intensify its lament, and inside the statue, the sound multiplied into ghostly echoes that sent shivers down Ilara's spine. But she ignored it. Her focus was on the ground, on the hidden promise. Hours passed. The sun set, and the darkness of night swallowed the little light that remained, save for the campfire's glow. Liam and Maya, already tired, had snuggled under the canvases, asleep. Ilara, however, continued her work. The campfire cast a halo of light over the area she had cleared, revealing a section of the mysterious surface. It was large, rectangular, and seemed to sink slightly into the ground, as if it were a lid or an entrance. A shiver ran through her body. It wasn't just a large stone. It was something constructed, something intentional. The shape was too precise to be natural. With a final effort, she managed to expose one of the slab's edges. It was a perfect fit, almost invisible, but there it was. A thin crack, a line that suggested an opening. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Hunger, cold, exhaustion, all were temporarily forgotten. What lay beneath this slab? What did the statue guard in its depths? The tension she felt now was different from the initial despair. It was a tension of discovery, of anticipation, a promise, perhaps, of something that could change everything. But there was also a subtle fear, a silent question. What if what lay beneath was more dangerous than the very desolation that had led them there? She ran her hand along the slab's edge, feeling the coldness and precision of its construction. It was heavy, imposing. How could she move it? Or more importantly, how could she open it? The campfire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the dark air before vanishing. Ilara looked at her sleeping children, at the trembling flame, and then back at the mysterious slab. That place, once merely a desperate refuge, now held a secret that cried out to be unveiled. And Ilara, the desolate widow, felt a new purpose emerge amidst the darkness. The coldness of the slab beneath her fingers was a constant reminder of its existence. Ilara looked at the dark, polished surface, at the almost imperceptible crack that marked its edge. It was a silent enigma at the heart of her new, unlikely home. The question was no longer if something was there, but what and how she would reach it. The slab seemed like a massive stone lid, too heavy to be moved by a single person. The wind's howl outside seemed to mock her helplessness, echoing through the statue's vastness. Ilara felt a shiver. That place, which had become a refuge, was now also a guardian, an obstacle. But the hopelessness from before had been replaced by a fierce determination. She couldn't give up. Not after all she had been through, not after finding this hidden promise. She stood up, her muscles aching from the effort of clearing the area. Her eyes scanned the statue's floor, searching for anything that might serve. A twisted piece of metal, perhaps longer and stronger than the last. A large, pointed stone. Her mind, once focused only on daily survival, now worked with a new purpose. The following days were dedicated to a new search, not for food or shelter, but for a tool. Ilara left the statue with renewed focus, ignoring the cold and hunger that haunted her. She scoured the surroundings, her eyes keen for any object that could serve as a lever. Liam, noticing the change in his mother, asked with wide eyes, "What are we going to find, Mama?" "I don't know, my love," she replied, her voice trying to be firm, "but we have to find out." Finally, she found it. It wasn't a perfect metal bar, but a long, heavy piece of partially charred wooden beam that had come loose from some abandoned structure nearby. It was heavy, rough, and dirty, but it seemed to have the necessary strength. Dragging it back to the statue was a Herculean effort, but the adrenaline of discovery propelled her. That night, the campfire crackled, casting dancing shadows over the mysterious slab. Liam and Maya, though curious, had already retreated under the canvases, sleep overcoming their excitement. Ilara, however, was awake, her heart beating a frantic rhythm. She positioned the wooden beam under the slab's crack, seeking a fulcrum. The sound of wood scraping against the polished stone was sharp in the night's silence. With a deep breath, she applied all her strength, pushing the beam down. The muscles in her arms and back tensed, burning under the effort. A low groan escaped her lips. The slab didn't move, not an inch. Frustration, a bitter and familiar feeling, began to surface. She tried again, adjusting the beam's angle, seeking a better leverage point. This time, with a grunt of effort, she felt a slight vibration. A low sound, like an ancient sigh, came from beneath the slab. It was a creak, almost inaudible, but Ilara felt it in her bones. "Strength, Ilara," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse. "Just a little more." She leaned into it with all her weight, pushing the beam with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The creak intensified, transforming into a heavy, slow drag. The crack in the slab seemed to widen slightly. Then, with a dry snap that echoed through the statue, the slab's edge lifted a few inches. The air that came from below was different. It wasn't the cold, dusty air of the statue, but a damp, stagnant breath, heavy with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. Ilara pushed the beam away, panting, and knelt. The campfire's faint light barely reached the opening, revealing an absolute darkness that seemed to swallow the light. With trembling hands, she tried to lift the slab a little more. It was too heavy to be completely removed, but she managed to tilt it enough for an opening about 60 centimeters wide to reveal itself. Below, there wasn't an irregular hole, but a staircase. Stone steps, worn by time, descended into the darkness. Ilara's heart beat like a drum in her chest. The tension was almost unbearable. Her eyes tried to penetrate the blackness, but it was useless. That was the statue's secret, the hidden treasure the premise had promised. But what awaited her below? A shiver ran through her body, a mix of dread and overwhelming curiosity. She looked at her sleeping children, at the crackling campfire, their only source of warmth and light. The staircase descended into an abyss, an uncertain promise. The decision was hers. Descend, or close the slab and pretend she had never found anything. The answer, she knew, was not a choice. Curiosity, hope, the need to find something more for her children, all propelled her forward. Ilara picked up a burning branch from the campfire, transforming it into an improvised torch. The flame flickered, casting dancing lights and shadows into the dark opening. A scent of smoke and burning wood mixed with the stagnant air coming from below. With the torch held high, she hesitated only for a moment, her throat dry. Then, with a last look at her children, Ilara began to descend the stone steps, one by one, into the unknown. The burning branch flickered, its trembling light fighting against the abyssal darkness. Each stone step beneath Ilara's feet was cold and smooth, marked by the passage of countless years. The air below was heavy and damp, impregnated with a metallic and earthy scent that scratched at her throat. Water droplets trickled down the stone walls, falling into unseen puddles with a melancholic sound that echoed in the vastness. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the crackle of the improvised torch and the accelerated beating of Ilara's heart. She descended further and further, with each step feeling the temperature drop, the air thin. The staircase seemed endless, winding in a gentle spiral into the depths. The walls, which she could barely see in the gloom, were of a dark, uniform stone, with no visible seams, polished like the surface of the slab she had moved. It was an ancient construction, no doubt, but of an engineering she had never seen. The torchlight revealed subtle carvings in some sections of the walls, complex geometric patterns that seemed to tell a forgotten story, but she couldn't linger. Finally, the steps ended on a narrow landing. Ahead, a corridor stretched into the darkness, as wide as the statue's interior above, but much lower, with a vaulted ceiling that barely allowed her to stand upright. The floor was of smooth stone, covered by a thin layer of dust. Ilara raised the torch, its flame casting long, dancing shadows that distorted reality, transforming shapes into lurking monsters. A shiver ran down her spine, and she gripped the branch more tightly. She advanced cautiously through the corridor, her eyes sweeping the surroundings. There were no windows, no cracks, just the cold stone and the stagnant air. The metallic scent intensified, mixing with an indistinct aroma of something ancient and powerful. She felt the presence of something, a latent energy that seemed to vibrate in the walls. It wasn't a threat, but a silent promise. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. Ilara's torch was insufficient to illuminate the entire expanse of the place, but she could discern the curved walls rising towards an invisible ceiling in the darkness. In the center of the chamber, something rose. Ilara approached, the torch extended ahead. The light revealed a colossal structure, a pillar of polished stone, identical to the walls, that rose from the floor to the ceiling. It wasn't an ordinary pillar. It was crafted with astonishing precision, covered in carvings and symbols that seemed to glow faintly under the flickering light. Atop the pillar, which she couldn't reach, was a platform, and upon it, a shape. Ilara's curiosity, mixed with a pang of apprehension, propelled her closer. What was it? An altar? A pedestal? As she approached, the torchlight revealed more details. The carvings on the sides of the pillar were intricate, depicting stylized humanoid figures and animals she didn't recognize. There were also inscriptions in an unknown language, lines and curves that seemed to dance on the stone. On the floor, around the base of the pillar, there were several shallow depressions, as if something had been buried there and then unearthed. But there were no signs of disturbed earth, only the indentations in the smooth stone. A chilling premonition took hold of her. She raised the torch to the top of the pillar. The shape on the platform was small, but perfectly symmetrical. It wasn't a glittering jewel, nor a chest of gold. It was a crystal sphere, a deep blue, almost black, that seemed to absorb the little light the torch offered, yet at the same time radiated a subtle inner glow, like a distant galaxy trapped in glass. It was mesmerizing. Ilara reached out, her fingers almost touching the crystal's cold surface. A faint electrical current seemed to course through her, a tingling that wasn't painful, but intensely strange. She recoiled her hand, gasping. This wasn't an ordinary stone. It wasn't an ornament. It was something of power, of mystery. Her eyes swept the chamber again, searching for any other clue. Then, she noticed, arranged in a semicircle around the central pillar, there were several other smaller structures, like pedestals, but empty. And in the walls, around the chamber, there were niches, also empty. It was as if the crystal sphere was only one part of a larger set. What did it all mean? Was the sphere the treasure, or was it just a key? Ilara's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what her eyes saw. The hopelessness that had accompanied her for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a complex emotion: awe, fear, and a pang of wild hope. She looked at the crystal sphere again, its internal light pulsing faintly. It was beautiful, yes, but also imposing, almost menacing in its silence. That place wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a sanctuary, a chamber of secrets. Ilara felt a weight in her chest, the immensity of the discovery overwhelming her. She had found something, but what to do with it? How could it help her children? The question echoed in the chamber unanswered as the torch flame dwindled, threatening to plunge her into an even deeper darkness. The torch flame, once a flickering beacon, was now little more than an agonizing red pinpoint, licking at the last piece of charred wood. The darkness of the circular chamber advanced, swallowing the edges of Ilara's vision, transforming the dancing shadows into an oppressive shroud. The heavy air seemed to suck the oxygen, and the metallic, earthy scent grew denser, almost suffocating. Ilara knew she had no time. The deep blue crystal sphere atop the pillar seemed to pulse in the gloom, a silent heart beating in the depths of the earth. She reached out again, this time with cold determination. If this was the treasure, she needed to understand it, even for a fleeting instant. Her fingers brushed the crystal's cold, perfectly smooth surface. A shock coursed through her arm, not of pain, but of a vibrant energy that spread throughout her body, making every nerve tingle. It wasn't static electricity, it was something deeper, more ancient. Blurred images and sensations flooded her mind. The vastness of time, the echo of distant voices, a sense of purpose and immense loss. It was as if the sphere were alive, a library of memories and power, and she, for a fleeting moment, could read its preface. The crystal's internal light seemed to intensify for a moment, a bluish glow that faintly illuminated the carvings around the pillar, making the humanoid figures and unknown symbols appear to stir. The contact was severed as abruptly as it began, when the last trace of flame on the torch died with an almost inaudible hiss. Total darkness fell upon Ilara, dense and absolute, stealing her sight and the ground beneath her feet. Her heart pounded, a hammer against her ribs. She was alone, in the deepest dark she had ever experienced, hundreds of meters below the surface. The scent of metal and wet earth seemed amplified in the blackness. Liam, Maya, she whispered, her voice failing, only to hear the echo swallowed by the silence. She stretched out her hands, fumbling for the cold, smooth pillar. The sphere was there, she knew, but now it was just a shadow in the void. What had she felt? A treasure, yes, but not one that could simply be carried out. It was something that demanded understanding, perhaps a ritual or more pieces. The vastness of the discovery, once a promise, was now an abyss of unknowns. The priority was to get back up. Ilara's breathing was heavy, and the air seemed increasingly thin. She turned, fumbling her way back to the narrow corridor. Every step was uncertain, every sound, a danger amplified by imagination. She shuffled her feet, hands outstretched, brushing against the cold walls, trying to maintain direction. The slightest deviation could lead her to a fall or a dead end. The corridor seemed endless in the dark, a passage to nowhere. The dampness on the walls was cold against her fingers, and the sound of water droplets echoed like ghostly footsteps. With each passing moment, anxiety mounted. What if the slab she had moved had shifted back into place? What if there was no way out? Finally, her fingers found the edge of the landing. She knelt, feeling the cold stone steps spiraling upwards. The ascent was harder than the descent. The muscles in her legs burned, and the persistent darkness sapped her courage. She counted the steps in her mind, trying to remain calm, visualizing the faint light of the campfire above, the warmth of her sleeping children. Inch by inch, she dragged herself upwards, the air becoming a little less dense, the scent of campfire smoke, though faint, beginning to mix with the stagnant air. A sliver of light, almost imperceptible at first, but growing, a promise of salvation. When Ilara's head finally emerged from the opening, the statue's air, once cold and dusty, felt like a breath of life. The campfire still crackled faintly, its last glowing embers casting a flickering light over the canvases where Liam and Maya slept soundly, oblivious to her journey. Ilara dragged herself out, her body aching, muscles trembling from exhaustion and tension. She pushed the heavy stone slab back into place, the scraping sound seeming deafening in the night silence. The crack vanished, the secret guarded once more. She sat near the fire, pulling a canvas closer to herself, the faint warmth a balm to her exhausted body. Her eyes fixed on the dying flames, but her mind was hundreds of meters below, in the dark chamber on the pulsing sphere. What had she found? It wasn't gold, nor jewels, nor a pile of coins. It was something infinitely more complex, more mysterious. A power, a source of knowledge? She didn't know, but the feeling that it was the key to their survival, to a future beyond misery, was undeniable. Hope, once a fragile seed, now germinated in her chest, mixed with a pang of dread at the magnitude of what lay ahead. How would she unravel the sphere's secrets? How would she transform that latent power into bread, into safety, into a true home for her children? The questions had no immediate answers, but for the first time in a long time, Ilara felt there was a path, however obscure. She lay down, her body heavy, but her mind in a whirlwind. As the last glow of the campfire died out and darkness embraced the statue, guarding its secrets, dawn arrived with a chilling promise, and Ilara awoke with every muscle in her body protesting. The exhaustion of the previous night weighed like lead, but her mind was in a whirlwind, replaying the descent, the shock of the sphere, the suffocating darkness. Her eyes opened to the faint light filtering through the statue's cracks, revealing the sleeping forms of Liam and Maya. They looked so small, so vulnerable, nestled under the canvases. Ilara's heart tightened. What she had found was real, but it seemed to belong to another world, distant from the reality of bread and water they faced every day. Liam was the first to stir, a lazy yawn stretching before he opened his eyes. "Morning, Mama," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Maya soon stirred too, her small eyes finding Ilara's. "Morning, my loves," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. She rose with a silent groan, feeling the stiffness in her legs and back. The scent of smoke from the extinguished campfire still lingered in the air. mixing with the dusty aroma of ancient stone. As she prepared a frugal breakfast, a few pieces of dry bread and water, Ilara watched her children. They played with pebbles, inventing silent stories, their innocence a painful contrast to the magnitude of the secret she now carried. How could she explain a secret chamber, a colossal pillar, and a crystal sphere that spoke without words? She couldn't. Not yet. The sensation of the crystal's touch still lingered on her skin, a residual tingling that seemed to have etched the blurred visions into her memory. She tried to recall the symbols, the figures, stylized humanoids, unknown animals, lines and curves that danced. There was a complexity that transcended anything she had ever seen. It wasn't a treasure one could sell in the market. It was something deeper, more ancient, and would require more than just courage to unravel. It would require knowledge. The idea of returning to the chamber both drew her and terrified her. The total darkness that had swallowed her still made her tremble, but she knew she had to return. She needed to study, observe, perhaps even draw what she saw, to try and understand. But she couldn't leave the children alone for so long again. "Mama, are you okay?" Maya asked, her voice small and worried. "You look tired." Ilara smiled at her daughter, a genuine smile this time. "I'm fine, dear. Just a little sleepy." She knelt and hugged them both. "I need to go out today. Try to find more supplies. You two stay here, promise? Play near the campfire, but don't wander off." Liam and Maya nodded, accustomed to their mother's outings. It was their routine, the incessant search for resources that barely kept them alive. But today, the routine felt like a distraction, a barrier between Ilara and the truth that lay beneath her feet. With an empty bag and renewed determination, Ilara left the statue. The sun outside was dazzling, the air fresh, a relief after the night's dampness. But her mind wasn't on the city's ruins, nor on the dangers lurking in the shadows. It was in the chamber below, on the crystal sphere. She walked through the dusty streets, her eyes scanning the ground for anything useful, a piece of metal, a scrap of fabric, perhaps even some wild berries. But the truth was, she was looking for more than that. She was searching for any trace of knowledge. There was an abandoned library on the city's outskirts, a place she avoided because it was dangerous, but now the idea hammered in her head. There might be ancient books, maps, anything that could shed light on the symbols, on the unknown language. With each step, the image of the crystal sphere pulsed in her mind. It was hope, yes, but also a burden. A promise of something grand, mixed with the dread of the responsibility it implied. She had found the treasure. Now she needed to find the key to use it. As the sun climbed higher, Ilara realized that the search for supplies was just an excuse to process everything. She needed a plan to understand, a plan to protect, and above all, a plan to transform that mystery into a future for her children. Hope, though fragile, was now a lit flame, and Ilara felt that for the first time in a long time, she had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. The treasure wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of a new and dangerous adventure. Ilara continued the pretense of her search for supplies, her mind already fixed on the next step. The sun scorched the city's ruins, and the wind stirred up dust devils that danced like ghosts among the skeletons of buildings. Her eyes, once trained to scan the ground for food or metal, now swept the horizons, seeking the silhouette of a particular structure, the library. It was a considerable risk. The library was in a more distant and dangerous part of the city, where rival gangs and wild creatures occasionally ventured. But the image of the sphere, the symbols etched into its surface and the pillar, hammered in her head with an urgency that supplanted fear. She quickened her pace, the empty bag swinging rhythmically beside her body. Every sound, the crunch of a pebble underfoot, The rustle of a dry bush made her heart race. The city was a labyrinth of shadows and hidden dangers, and she was delving deeper into it, driven by a need that transcended hunger. With each block she advanced, the air seemed heavier, the silence more oppressive. She crept along crumbling walls, staying alert for any movement, any sign of presence. Finally, the library's structure came into view. It was an imposing building, though partially collapsed, with large stone arches that seemed to weep dust. The roof had caved in at several points, and the walls were cracked, revealing the passage of time and neglect. Ilara hesitated for a moment at the entrance, the cold, stagnant air emanating from within a grim invitation. A strong scent of mold and old paper hung in the air. With a sigh of determination, she entered the main hall. Sunlight filtered through holes in the ceiling, creating luminous beams that danced over piles of rubble and toppled shelves. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of wood and the rustle of loose pages carried by the internal breeze. Thousands of books lay scattered across the floor, many reduced to dust or gnawed by insects, their covers torn, their pages faded. It was a graveyard of knowledge. Ilara began to search. There was no method, just a desperate quest for anything that looked ancient, had illustrations, or mentioned legends and myths. She moved among the shelves, feeling the rough texture of the covers, the sweet, rusty smell of old paper. Her fingers brushed against illegible titles, lost stories. With each passing minute, hope dwindled. How to find a needle in a haystack of millennia. After what seemed like hours, her tired eyes landed on a book partially buried under a pile of fallen bricks. The cover, though dusty and faded, seemed sturdier than the others, made of thick, dark leather. With effort, she unearthed it, wiping away the dust with her sleeve. The title was illegible, written in ancient ornate calligraphy, but the spine, once gilded, revealed an engraved symbol, an ascending spiral, strangely familiar. With trembling hands, Ilara opened the book. The pages were thick and yellowed, and the ink, though faded, was still legible. It wasn't a book of ordinary stories. It seemed to be a tome of ancient studies, with complex diagrams and detailed illustrations of constellations, strange architectures, and, to Ilara's shock, stylized humanoid figures that strangely resembled the carvings around the pillar in the secret chamber. Her fingers traced the lines of a diagram of a temple or colossal structure. In the center, a pillar, and atop the pillar, a circle, with rays emanating from it. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was a representation, not of the sphere itself, but of the sphere's context. That book didn't speak directly of the treasure, but of the world that had created it. There was something about the Guardians of the Star Core, written in a language she didn't understand, but the diagrams were universal. She turned the pages, absorbing every image, every symbol that seemed to echo the carvings she had barely glimpsed in the darkness. A rudimentary map showed a series of interconnected structures, and one of them, unmistakably, was the statue they lived in. This wasn't the treasure itself, but the key to deciphering it. The book was heavy, fragile, and impossible to carry while trying to gather supplies. But Ilara couldn't leave it there. The information contained within its pages was more valuable than any food or water she could find. She needed to take it back, study every detail, every line, every drawing. With the book pressed against her chest, Ilara began to retrace her steps homeward. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The city's dangers hadn't diminished, but now there was a focus, a direction for her quest. She was no longer just trying to survive, she was trying to understand. The weight of the book in her arms was a burden, yes, but also an anchor, a promise that her children's future could be more than just the darkness and cold of an abandoned statue. She had a clue. And that was all she needed to continue. The weight of the book in her arms was a palpable reality, a counterpoint to the lengthening shadows that swallowed the day's remnants. Ilara quickened her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs, not just from physical exertion, but from growing fear. The city, a labyrinth of dust and silent ruins by day, transformed into a predator by night. The silence that was once oppressive now carried veiled threats, every creak of rusted metal or crunch of a stone underfoot reverberating like a gunshot. She crept through the dark alleys, using the crumbling ruins as cover, her eyes sweeping every corner, every crevice. Her breath grew ragged, not just from the accelerated pace, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The scent of distant smoke and the sharp yowl of a wild animal tore through the air, making her shrink against a cold wall. She waited, motionless, until the sound dissipated into the darkness, and then continued, the book's thick leather a fragile shield against the hostile world. Finally, the colossal silhouette of the statue emerged on the horizon, a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, turning to vapor in the cold night air. She ran the last few meters, the static of fear still tingling on her skin. As she entered the opening at the statue's base, the familiar scent of campfire smoke and comforting warmth enveloped her. Maya and Liam slept soundly near the dying fire, their childish faces illuminated by the faint glow of the embers. The relief of seeing them safe was almost overwhelming. Ilara carefully placed the book in a dark corner, covering it with an old piece of cloth to hide it. That object, so valuable, could not be exposed. She knelt beside her children, stroking Maya's hair. The girl stirred, her eyes slowly opening. "Mama," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Shh, I'm here, my love," Ilara whispered, forcing a tired smile. "I'm back." Maya hugged her tightly, snuggling into her chest. Liam, sensing the movement, also awoke, rubbing his eyes. "You took a long time," he said, his voice small. "I know, dear. I found some good things." Ilara lied softly, feeling the weight of the omission. She couldn't explain what she had truly found, not yet. They were too young to comprehend the magnitude, and too vulnerable to bear the danger this new discovery brought. After ensuring the children were once again in deep sleep, Ilara waited. The night silence within the statue was profound, punctuated only by the children's regular breathing and the occasional crackle of the fire. When darkness was total and she was certain she wouldn't be disturbed, Ilara unearthed the book. With trembling hands, she opened it again, using the flickering light of the campfire as her only source. The yellowed pages revealed the same complex diagrams, the same stylized figures that resembled the pillars' carvings. Ilara traced the lines with her fingers, trying to decipher what she saw. The symbols were an enigmatic dance of shapes and strokes, a lost language that screamed in silence. She focused on the diagrams of the colossal structure, which appeared to be the very statue they lived in. The pillar in the center, the circle atop. There were arrows, energy points, and what seemed to be activation sequences. Ilara's mind reeled. It wasn't a map of common treasures, nor a legend told in words. It was an instruction manual, a scheme of ancestral engineering, a guide to something she could barely conceive. "Guardians of the Star Core," she murmured, repeating the words she'd seen in the book, even without understanding their meaning. The images of the crystal sphere, the blurred visions of a pulsing cosmos, returned with disturbing clarity. That book was the key, yes, but the lock was infinitely more complex than she had imagined. The night wore on, and Ilara felt weariness weigh on her shoulders, but she couldn't tear her eyes from the pages. Every drawing was a puzzle, every line a secret. She realized that the interpretation would be neither quick nor easy. It would require time, patience, and an understanding that went beyond what she possessed. The book was a promise, and a burden, a promise of a future she had never dreamed of, and a burden of responsibility that crushed her. How could she decipher this? How could she use this knowledge to protect her children when the danger of its existence was so palpable? Ilara closed the book, the sound of leather against paper, a grim echo in the night's stillness. She needed more than a guide. She needed wisdom. And that wisdom could only be found in the dark chamber. Beside the crystal sphere, perhaps in a dialogue that transcended words, the challenge was monumental, but the flame of hope, now fueled by a tangible purpose, burned brighter than ever. She put the book away, the secret now a silent weight in her heart, awaiting dawn for the next stage of her perilous journey. Dawn brought with it a deceptive quiet. Grey light peered through the statue's cracks, painting the walls with dancing shadows. Ilara hadn't slept. The book, hidden under the cloth, pulsed with a secret that kept her awake, her mind revolving around the diagrams, the arrows, the circle atop the pillar. The promise and danger of that discovery intertwined in her chest, a knot of anxiety and hope. Maya and Liam awoke shortly after, their childish laughter echoing in the vastness of the space. Ilara forced a smile, preparing the little food that remained. "Mama needs to go out for a while today," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I need to find more things for us." Liam's eyes widened. "Alone? It's dangerous, Mama." "I know, my love, but I must go. You'll be safe here. Keep the fire lit and don't stray far from it, understood?" She squeezed her children's hands, feeling the fragility of their small lives, the immense responsibility that weighed upon her. "I'll be back before nightfall." She left them a canteen of water and a small portion of dried fruit, her heart heavy with the lie, but knowing the truth would be too heavy a burden for them. With her children nestled near the fire, Ilara unearthed the book. It was heavier than she remembered, a compendium of mysteries that now became her guide. She descended the familiar ramps and staircases, the book's leather brushing against her thigh with each step. The air grew colder and damper as she delved deeper into the statue's entrails, the dense silence of the darkness swallowing the sound of her own footsteps. Finally, the entrance to the secret chamber appeared, a portal to the unknown. The faint light of the torch she lit revealed the imposing pillar, the familiar carvings that now seemed more vivid, more significant, and there, in the center, the crystal sphere, pulsing with a soft, ethereal light, like a cosmic heart. Ilara opened the book, the yellowed pages trembling slightly in her hands. She compared it to the carvings, to every line and curve of the pillar. The book's diagrams were a blueprint, a key. What appeared to be activation sequences, energy points and flows began to make sense in a strange, intuitive way. She traced the lines with her fingers, feeling a connection, a resonance between the paper and the stone, between the ancient ink and the energy emanating from the crystal. One of the diagrams showed a series of points on the pillar, aligned with certain constellations. Ilara raised the torch, examining the carvings. There were small, almost imperceptible depressions at specific points. With her heart pounding, she placed her fingertip on one of them, following the sequence indicated in the book. A low hum filled the chamber, a sound that seemed to come from within the stone itself. The crystal sphere intensified its glow, casting beams of light that danced over the pillar's carvings. The stylized humanoid figures seemed to come alive, their outlines shimmering. Ilara continued, touching the points in a rhythmic cadence, guided by the diagrams. With each touch, the hum grew louder, and the sphere's light became more intense, almost dazzling. Suddenly, a carving on the pillar, one representing an ascending spiral, the same symbol from the book's spine, began to glow with a bluish light. The crystal sphere atop pulsed with overwhelming energy, and a deep sound, like the song of a giant whale, reverberated through the chamber. The visions returned, clearer, more vivid. A miniature universe, stars being born and dying, galaxies spinning, and knowledge pouring into her mind, not in words, but in sensations, in understandings. She understood. It wasn't a treasure of gold or jewels. It was a treasure of knowledge, of energy, of a technology that defied the very conception of her era. The sphere was a portal, a repository, a star core. And the book wasn't just a manual, it was the key to awakening that power, to accessing the wisdom of the Guardians. The sound subsided, the sphere's light returned to its soft glow, but the chamber was no longer the same. Ilara felt the energy in the air, a presence that was once latent and now awake. She had activated something. She had opened a door. But where would this door lead, and what or who awaited her on the other side? The weight of knowledge was immense, and the truth was grander and more terrifying than any legend. Ilara stepped back, the book falling softly from her hands to the chamber's dusty floor. Her knees buckled, but she remained standing, her eyes fixed on the crystal sphere. It was no longer just an ethereal object. It was a pulsating beacon, its soft glow filling the space with a light that seemed to have weight, a tangible presence. The air vibrated with an almost electrical energy, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. The chamber, once a gloomy refuge, now felt like a cosmic womb, brimming with ancestral power. The voice she heard wasn't sonic, wasn't made of vibrating air, but of thoughts forming directly in her mind, clear and resonant. A voice without gender, without age, yet imbued with a wisdom that transcended time. You have awakened the core, Guardian. The key is in your hands, the door, now open. Ilara felt a vertigo, as if she were floating in space. The visions that were once fragmented now wove together into a coherent tapestry. She saw the Guardians, not beings of flesh and blood, but a collective consciousness, a brotherhood of minds dedicated to preserving the knowledge and energy of the universe. They had built the statue, the pillar, the sphere, as a sanctuary, a repository for what they called stellar memory, a distant echo of civilizations that had thrived and perished. The Star Core was the heart of this sanctuary, a bridge between worlds and eras, capable of channeling energy and transmitting wisdom. The weight of that understanding crushed her. It wasn't a treasure to sell, nor a power to dominate others. It was an immense responsibility, a legacy left for those deemed worthy to receive it. And for some reason she still didn't comprehend, she had been chosen. Your purpose is to protect, the thought voice continued, and to prepare. The time of the Great Void approaches, and the core must be guarded. Great Void. The words echoed in her mind, laden with a sense of impending catastrophe. Ilara didn't know what it was, but she felt a chill run down her spine. There was more than she could assimilate, more than she could grasp in a single moment. Her instinct as a mother, as a protector, ignited. How could she, an ordinary woman, protect something so vast and ancient? Her children. Their lives depended on her choices. She bent down, picking up the book. The pages seemed to vibrate in her hands. It was a manual, yes, but also a sacred scripture. There were diagrams showing how to channel the core's energy, how to utilize it for purposes beyond her imagination. But there were also warnings, symbols of danger, representations of forces that sought the core's power for destructive ends. The statue, her children's unlikely home, was more than a shelter. It was a fortress, a trap, a beacon visible to those who hunted that power. A chill ran through Ilara. The promise of safety for her children, which seemed within reach, now transformed into an even greater threat. She had attracted something. The activation of the core, however subtle, would certainly not go unnoticed by those lurking in the world's shadows. Time seemed to have stretched in the chamber, but reality outside called her. She had promised her children she would return before nightfall. With a last look at the crystal sphere, which now pulsed with a constant serene rhythm, Ilara closed the book. The torchlight flickered, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance with the newly revealed secrets. She climbed the ramps and staircases, the book firmly pressed against her chest, the weight of knowledge and responsibility overwhelming. When she emerged into the statue's main area, daylight was fading, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Maya and Liam sat near the campfire, their figures small and vulnerable. The scent of smoke and familiar warmth enveloped her, but couldn't dispel the cold that had settled in her heart. "Mama!" Maya exclaimed, running to hug her. Liam also approached, his eyes curious. "Did you get more things?" Ilara hugged them tightly, her face buried in Maya's soft hair. "Yes, my loves, more than you can imagine." The lie was now a vital necessity, a shield against the frightening truth. They couldn't know. Not yet. Their innocence was the only thing she could protect. As she prepared a simple dinner, the night's silence was broken by a distant sound. It wasn't the yowl of a wild animal or the howl of the wind. It was a metallic, rhythmic sound, like heavy boots marching on rocky ground. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the statue's entrance, and it was drawing closer. Ilara froze, her heart pounding erratically. Her children, oblivious, continued to eat. She stared into the darkness of the entrance. Her breath caught in her throat. The door had been opened, and now the world was knocking. The metallic, rhythmic sound intensified, reverberating through the vast walls of the abandoned statue. It wasn't the echo of a solitary animal, but the coordinated march of heavy footsteps laden with intent. Ilara's heart leapt in her chest, a furious drum against her ribs. The cold she had felt in the secret chamber now spread, a chilling premonition that paralyzed her. "Mama?" Liam asked, his voice small and sleepy, oblivious to the approaching threat. Maya, more attentive, felt the tension in Ilara's grip. Without hesitation, Ilara threw a handful of earth over the campfire's embers, snuffing out the orange glow in a blink. Darkness swallowed them, dense and almost absolute, broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the statue's distant entrance. She pulled her children close, pressing them against the stone pillar that served as their shelter. "Silence," she whispered, her voice a mere thread of air. "Don't say a word, don't move." The small bodies trembled in her arms, but they obeyed, sensing the urgency in their mother's voice. Ilara peered through the gap between the pillar and the wall, her eyes trying to penetrate the darkness. The sound of marching grew louder, clearer, now accompanied by muffled voices, indistinct, but undeniably human. They were inside. A strong, piercing light swept the statue's interior, coming from the main entrance. It was a powerful flashlight, cutting through the darkness like a blade, revealing shadowy figures advancing cautiously. There were at least 3 of them, perhaps more. Their steps were firm, their movements calculated. They wore dark uniforms and carried equipment Ilara couldn't identify, but which seemed heavy and technological. The air filled with the scent of metal and something reminiscent of ozone, an artificial, cold aroma. The flashlight's beam danced over the statue's uneven surfaces, revealing every crack and shadow. Ilara cringed, hugging her children even tighter, praying the darkness would be their disguise. One of the men raised a device that looked like a scanner, sweeping the area with a green light beam. "No signs of recent activity on the upper level," a deep metallic voice said, echoing through the vast space. "Readings are low." "Continue the scan, Captain," another voice replied, sharper and more impatient. The pulse was clear. "The core has been activated. They are here." Ilara's heart turned to ice. They knew. They knew about the core, and they knew she had awakened it. The thought voice in the secret chamber had warned, those who hunt that power. They were here. The scanner's green light approached, sweeping the area where they were hidden. Ilara closed her eyes, pulling Maya's and Liam's heads against her chest, trying to make them as small as possible. She could feel the device's vibration in the air, the energy it emitted, almost as if she could touch it. The man with the scanner stopped a few feet from their hiding spot. Ilara felt sweat trickle down her forehead, panic threatening to overwhelm her. She could hear the man's heavy breathing, the rustle of his uniform. A low hiss escaped the device. "Captain, I'm detecting a faint energy signature here, residual perhaps, but consistent with the pulse." "Too faint to be the core," the captain replied, his voice too close. "It might just be the structure's ambient energy. Focus on the deeper levels. The star core doesn't manifest with such an insignificant signature." The man with the scanner hesitated for a moment, the green light hovering dangerously close to Ilara's head. Then, to her unspeakable relief, he moved on, descending the ramps that led to the statue's lower levels towards the secret chamber. The others followed him, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they disappeared into the depths. The sound of their footsteps and voices gradually faded, swallowed by the vast structure. Ilara remained motionless for a long time, her muscles tense, her body aching from the effort of staying still. Only when silence returned, heavy and oppressive, did she allow herself a trembling sigh. "Are they gone, Mama?" Maya whispered, her voice thick with fear. Ilara squeezed them once more, kissing the top of each head. "Yes, my loves, for now." But she knew they weren't safe. The statue, their refuge, had become a beacon. What she had awakened was not just a treasure, but a target, and the presence of those men, with their equipment and their knowledge of the core, was proof that the Great Void was not just a distant prophecy, but an imminent threat already knocking at their door. The night would be long, and the fight for her family's survival had just gained a terrifying and unknown dimension. Ilara remained huddled, her arms around Maya and Liam, her heart still hammering against her ribs. The artificial cold scent the men carried lingered in the air, a chilling reminder of the intrusion. The silence that followed their descent was almost more terrifying than the sound of their footsteps. It was a charged silence, portending their return. Below, muffled voices and the intermittent hiss of the scanner floated through the statue's vast walls. Ilara imagined the men scouring the secret chamber, their light beams cutting through the darkness where the star core pulsed. She felt a pang of guilt. By activating the core, she had drawn them in, transforming her refuge into an immense beacon of danger. Maya, trembling, lifted her head. "Are they really gone, Mama?" "Not yet, my love," Ilara whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "But we're safe here. Stay still, like statues." Liam, more sensitive to his mother's fear, merely snuggled closer, his small body tense. Darkness was a friend now, but also an accomplice to terror. Ilara could feel the book, the Guardian's manual, pressing against her chest, a heavy burden of knowledge and responsibility. The Great Void was no longer an abstract threat, but a shadow already creeping through the corridors of their home. Time dragged on, measured only by the frantic beats of Ilara's heart. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds from below grew clearer, the voices more frustrated. Nothing, just energetic residues from the structure itself. The pulse was an anomaly. The captain's grave voice echoed, laden with irritation. "No sign of the star core on this level." A metallic clang, and the sound of heavy footsteps ascending the ramps broke the silence. The piercing light of the flashlight reappeared at the entrance to the lower levels, cutting through the darkness. The men emerged, their figures dark and imposing, sweeping the statue's main space with their light beams. Ilara closed her eyes again, clutching her children, the scent of sweat and ozone intensifying. "Search for anything that might indicate the presence of occupants," the captain ordered, his voice closer now. "A camp, traces of fire, anything. The flashlight's beam danced over the extinguished campfire, over the cold remnants of dinner. Ilara felt a shiver. Would they notice the fresh earth over the embers? Would the smell of smoke be enough to betray their presence? "No sign of a recent camp, Captain," one of the men said, his voice resonating a few feet from Ilara's hiding spot. She could feel the warmth of the light on her skin, the sound of the man's breathing, just dust and debris. The structure appears uninhabited as expected. The captain sighed. The pulse was real. Someone activated the core. They are here, or they were. We can't afford to neglect a lead. He raised the scanner again, and the green light swept the area, hovering for an instant over the pillar where Ilara and her children were hidden. A low hiss escaped the device, but the captain ignored it. "Sweep the outer perimeter. They might have fled." Still, the captain seemed reluctant to give up. "Set up a surveillance camp at the entrance. No one enters or leaves undetected. If the core was activated, they'll return. Or perhaps they're just observing us, waiting for us to leave." Ilara felt the ground tremble slightly as the men moved towards the main entrance. The sound of their footsteps receded, followed by the clang of metal as they positioned something heavy at the entrance. A sharp hiss cut through the air, and an invisible barrier seemed to rise. They were surrounded. Their flashlights' beams disappeared to the outside, but Ilara knew they were out there waiting. The statue, once a refuge, had become a prison. What she had awakened was not just a treasure, but bait. And now, she and her children were fish caught on the hook, with invisible predators lurking in the night's darkness. Maya began to whimper softly, and Liam squeezed his eyes shut, tears streaming down his face. Ilara hugged them with all the strength she had, despair and determination mingling in her chest. Protect the core, protect her children. The two responsibilities were now inseparable, and the only way to fulfill one seemed to compromise the other. She couldn't flee with them, not without being detected, and she couldn't simply wait. The night would be long, and dawn would bring even more terrible decisions. The cold stone beneath Ilara offered no comfort, only the stark reality of her confinement. The low hum of an invisible vibration resonated through the colossal statue's foundations, surrounding them on all sides. Her children, Maya and Liam, still trembled in her arms, their muffled sobs echoing the silent panic that had settled in her own chest. Protect the core, protect her children. The words intertwined, a tight knot of responsibility. How could she do both if the core's very presence had made them a target, and the refuge they lived in had turned into a cage? Outside, the men organized themselves. She could hear the dragging of heavy equipment, the crackle of low-frequency radios, the muffled voices that seemed to blend with the cold wind blowing through the entrance. They were setting up a vigil, patient and relentless. They wouldn't leave. They wouldn't let them leave. The scent of ozone and metal, once a chilling memory, was now a persistent aroma of threat. Ilara closed her eyes, seeking clarity in the internal darkness. The Guardian's manual, still pressed against her chest, seemed to burn. The words of the secret chamber's voice echoed in her mind. Those who hunt that power. They were here, and the captain, with his cold certainty, knew the core had been activated. Their failure to find it, despite the scanner, was a mystery, but not a guarantee of safety. They had underestimated the faint energy signature near her, but not the overall threat. She couldn't wait. Dawn would bring not only light, but perhaps a new, more intense, more focused round of searching. They couldn't remain hidden forever. The night's cold was already deepening, and her children's small bodies needed warmth, food, and safety that she could no longer offer in that precarious hiding spot. An idea, tenuous as a spider's thread, began to form in Ilara's mind. The core. It had communicated with her, had reacted to her touch. The book spoke of a connection, of a symbiosis. If the core was a beacon, perhaps it could also be a shield, or perhaps a door. The men sought a powerful manifestation, a clear pulse. What if the key wasn't strength, but subtlety? She opened her eyes, determination replacing despair. She looked at Maya and Liam, whose pale faces were illuminated only by the distant glow of the moon. They deserved more than a destiny of waiting and fear. "My loves," Elara whispered, her voice firmer now, but still laden with urgency. "We need to be very, very brave now, more than ever." Liam, his large, wet eyes, nodded, his childlike trust in his mother unwavering. Maya, the older one, sensed the change in Elara's voice and straightened slightly. "What are we going to do, Mama?" Elara looked into the darkness that led to the statue's depths, to the secret chamber where the core pulsed with a life of its own. The only direction left was inward. If danger lay outside, the answer, perhaps, lay in the heart of that bizarre structure that had become their home, and now their prison. "We're going to the core," she said, her decision echoing in the vast silence. "We're going home." She broke the embrace, feeling the icy air touch her skin. Carefully, without making the slightest sound, Elara moved, pulling her children out of their hiding spot. Every step was a silent prayer, every shadow a potential enemy. Darkness was their only ally, but she knew that to face what was to come, she would need a strength far greater than the mere absence of light. The descent to the secret chamber would be dangerous, but remaining on the main floor was a slow death sentence. If they were to be hunted, let it be on their own terms, in the place where true power resided. Elara clutched the manual, feeling the ancient energy emanating from it, a guide for the journey that had barely begun. The descent through the statue's internal ramps was a procession of silent ghosts. Elara guided her children, their bare feet barely touching the cold, dusty floor. Liam, his small hand clutching his mother's skirt, stumbled occasionally, but dared not make a sound. Maya, a little older, kept her eyes fixed on Elara's back, her breath caught in her chest. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the silvery beams of moonlight that filtered through the upper cracks, dancing on the dusty walls like wandering spirits. The scent of damp earth and rusted metal intensified as they delved deeper into the structure's entrails. Elara felt the Guardian's manual vibrate faintly in her hand, a subtle guide, almost a heartbeat in sync with her own. The whispered words of the secret chamber's voice echoed in her mind, "Those who hunt that power." They were out there, and perhaps for an instant, she had heard a muffled sound of voices, a distant crackle that could be a radio communication or just her tormented imagination. The threat was real, palpable, and the only direction that didn't lead to capture was towards the heart of that stone monster. Finally, the faint light of a bluish glow began to filter into the darkness ahead. A low hum, almost inaudible, filled the air, an ethereal melody that seemed to resonate directly in her bones. The secret chamber, the star core. As they entered the vast space, the core's light enveloped them, a soft, pulsating glow that pushed back the shadows. It floated in the center of the chamber, a crystalline, iridescent sphere of energy that seemed to contain entire galaxies within it. Maya and Liam let out a collective gasp, their childish faces reflecting awe and a touch of reverent fear. Elara approached, reaching out. The warmth emanating from the core was welcoming, unlike the biting cold they felt outside. As she touched its smooth surface, a pulse of energy coursed through her body, a familiar sensation, but now much more intense, filling her with a clarity that dispelled fear. The manual in her other hand seemed to light up, its pages turning on their own to an ancient engraving of a symbol she recognized, the same pattern that adorned the core's surface. "Mama, what is it?" Maya whispered, pointing to the symbol that lit up. "It's a key, my love," Ilara replied, her voice laden with a new understanding. The manual spoke of a deep connection, of a symbiotic activation. It wasn't just a treasure to be exploited, but an entity to be understood, to be felt. And the statue, she realized, wasn't just a hiding place, but a receptacle, an amplifier. Outside, the captain and his men were impatient. "There's no way they could have escaped," the captain's voice echoed, muffled but audible through the thick walls. "The perimeter is secure. They are here, or the core is here, and they are merely a lure." A sound of heavy footsteps approaching the main chamber's entrance made Ilara's heart race. They were coming back. Ilara closed her eyes, concentrating. The core pulsed in response to her touch, its blue light intensifying. She didn't know exactly what to do, but she trusted her instinct, the connection that had formed. She remembered the words about the great void, about the need to protect not just the power, but the balance. With a deep breath, she projected her intention into the core. Safety, protection, a home, not for herself, but for her children, for the future. The core responded with a silent explosion of energy. The blue light spread through the chamber, enveloping Ilara and her children in a warm, vibrant cocoon. The chamber walls began to glow with the same hue, and the ethereal hum transformed into a harmonious melody. It wasn't a melody of raw power, but of resonance, of life. On the statue's main floor, the captain and his men stopped abruptly. The captain's scanner shrieked uncontrollably, its green light flashing red. "What is that?" he snarled, his voice full of alarm. "A massive energy signature. It's coming from below." A tremor ran through the statue, not of destruction, but of transformation. The heavy metal doors leading to the main chamber, once sealed by the men's barrier, now opened with a slow, majestic creak, bathed in an ethereal blue light that emanated from its depths. It wasn't an attack, but an invitation, a revelation. The men recoiled, their faces pale in the light of their flashlights. The surveillance barrier they had set up at the statue's entrance, the invisible force field, failed with a dry crackle, dissipating into the cold night air. The statue was no longer a prison, but an open door, a beacon of a new era. Ilara opened her eyes. She stood within the cocoon of blue light, her children nestled close to her, their faces serene. The core continued to pulse, but its energy was no longer wild. It was controlled, directed by her intention. The entire statue seemed to breathe with her. The voice of the secret chamber, now clearer and warmer, resonated in her mind, but seemed to come from the core itself, from the statue itself. "You have not merely found the treasure, Guardian. You have awakened it, and with it you have awakened yourself." The great void was still a threat, but Ilara felt a new hope. The core was not just a power, it was a promise of protection, of knowledge, of a future where they would not merely be survivors, but builders. The statue, their unlikely home, had revealed itself as the cradle of something much greater, a beacon of hope in a desolate world. The men outside, confused and frightened by the manifestation of energy, dared not enter. They had sought a treasure, but found something that defied their understanding, something they could not control. Ilara looked at her children, their faces illuminated by the core's blue light, and a soft smile formed on her lips. She had fought, sacrificed, and now, in the heart of that colossal statue, she had found not just a home, but a purpose. The journey had only just begun, but the family was united, strong, and ready to face what came next, guided by the pulsing light of the star core. The void was no longer an imminent threat, but a challenge to be overcome, and they had the key, they had the light, they had each other.